Why do you think Trump won?
Um,
And why do you think he won with some voters that were on the blue team, at
yeah,
least in 2012 and 2020? I'm not so sure they were there in 2016. I think they didn't show up.
I'm gonna say that this was a vibes election, and I think
I hate that expression. No offense. I get
no,
it.
no, but
But,
I'm telling,
vibes,
but
this is the cranky old man in me, I'm
but
a
but
Gen
when you,
Xer. You're millennial,
I
technically.
am barely,
But
but
you're
no,
you're you're a
it's
little more Gen X in probably
yes,
how you
exactly.
lived culturally. Yeah.
So what I will say is this. The reason that I say that is because how many interviews have you seen where you ask people, well, why did you vote for Trump? They can't give you a policy. So we
Well, they
know.
didn't. It always felt to me it was a vote against, not a vote for.
I don't know about that. I definitely felt like, as far as the people that were willing to talk,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it was absolutely a vote for him. And if they talked about policies, it still wasn't really policies. Like I remember being on the road and talking to various men, mostly black men, and I'd say, "What's up?" And they'd be like, "Well, we feel like the Democratic Party is emasculating us." And then I'd say, how so? Right? Like they
Mm-hmm.
still weren't talking about policy, right? Like they weren't like it's not like they answered with like policy per se. The only thing that they would say about quote unquote policy was about trans folk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would explain to them that it's a distraction because I remember being at a barbershop in Philly and talking to a guy, and he had this beautiful little daughter that was running around, and I was like, well, I mean, I hear you, and I'm not going to ask you to change how you believe about whatever you believe and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. But like, tell me, is that going to better your ability to say own your own barbershop one day? Is that going to better your ability to take care of your child? And frankly, if you are concerned about who's playing sports, can you tell me which trans children go to
Mm-hmm.
school with your daughter right now? And like, he was like, I mean, I'm gonna vote for her, but those are the only, you know what I mean? But it was kind of like that. And so,
How
as
big do you think this? I was there. How big do you think this black men voter issue with Kamala Harris? How much of that do you think was specific to hesitation of voting, a black man hesitating to vote for a black woman?
um, I will tell you what I was told. Because I did think that I definitely think that there was misogyny in this across the board, no matter what color male you're talking about. I just think
Mm-hmm.
that you'd be in error to not like know that there was misogyny that
Mm-hmm.
existed. I will say this though. The very first polling briefing that we had, with a pollster that I trust a lot,
Mm-hmm.
he briefed the Black Caucus and he said that one of the issues that he was running into with Black and Brown communities was that she had been a prosecutor. And
So it's more of a resume thing that
there was
yeah.
definitely some resume stuff that disallowed her from being able to build the type of rapport of
Mm-hmm.
trust within these marginalized communities that historically have been targeted
By the way,
by.
this was a huge problem in her own campaign for president during the primaries, which is why she pivoted. She was trying to get out of that because that was being used by other Democratic campaigns to say, hey, she was a prosecutor. She was putting black men in jail.
And the
And
thing
so
is,
she was
her
right, which is why she went down the busing road with, she had to go to some places that she probably wouldn't have normally gone, but she felt she had to because she was trying to fix her own biography issues that
so
some voters had.
so literally early numbers that we were
Mhm.
given, and I promise you, I really do trust this pollster, said that. So if you think back to my DNC speech,
Mm.
one of the things that they actually, the guidance that I was given was to actually lean into her being a prosecutor. And I'm like, oh hell no. I'm like, that is not helpful, right? And so
Right.
so when I did it, I did a bit of a swing on it, right? As a criminal defense attorney. And I
Mm.
explained like this is the kind of
Right.
prosecutor all would have wanted, right? Like so I built it that
Sure.
way. But I did talk to some people, even a prominent rapper who was like, I'm gonna support her, but I don't feel comfortable openly endorsing her, but I'm gonna vote for her. And I'm like, why? And so he told me that one of the issues was just kind of like the prosecutor thing. And I said, and I made sure to talk about the things
Hmm.
that we had been told move the needle with these groups, right? Like
Yep.
knowing that she had like second chance programs and things like that, like letting them know that she was one of the good ones, like one of the ones that we would have wanted if it was Breonna Taylor. That it mean like that's the kind that you want, right? So we were trying to do that, but I think, and it goes back to kind of the Trump phenomenon. I think that what had been baked in about the vice president was that she was a prosecutor. They did not know very much beyond that. And when you're talking about 107 days of a campaign, it's kind of hard to get that across. And
that's a classic case where more time would have helped, at least on that issue.
Absolutely. I absolutely believe that, especially since you want people to not fear you, but you want them to like trust you. That's what it comes down to, is like trust. And, you know, it's like you can point out how many lies Trump does or whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't
But one
work,
of the reasons
I
I think that he got away with trying to paint us as liars is we're like, this dude is not a good businessman. But you got to think about his profile, and you have to think about who he is. And this is very specific to him. You have traveled the country, potentially the world, and seen buildings with the name Trump on the side of them. And then you don't get enough FaceTime with somebody to explain, no, his name is on the building, but he don't own the building. Like you don't like get into the minutia on that. So he had been built up as this amazing, smart businessman who had all this money, instead of like, no, he inherited money when he was born. And frankly, he would have had more money if he just sat on that money and didn't do anything, because he
bankrupted a casino. Do you know how hard that is?
Yeah.
I mean,
everybody else beat the house. I know, it's crazy. So
I'd love to bankrupt a casino. It's hard.
But like but still, like how many people know all of these details, right? And so that's so there was this long-standing kind of idea of Trump as this successful, smart, hard businessman. And then for the most part, what people knew about the vice president is that she had been a prosecutor. She had been a prosecutor on the state level. She had been the attorney general. Like they only kind of knew her in that way, because I remember struggling with it way before we were figuring out who was going to run for what or whatever.
Sure.
Was this issue or this idea of people that said, well, I voted for Kamala, right? Like they went and voted for the ticket, right?
Right.
Voted for Joe and Kamala, but they really went because they wanted to vote for her. And they were saying things like, well, we haven't seen her, right? And so then it's like, vice presidents are really not like that prominent. Like that's not their job. They are supporting cast members, right? So I think we just really got, and it wasn't until she was stepping in as the actual nominee that she could then go ahead and direct her way. And she just didn't have enough time, in my opinion.
Do you feel like she should get another shot at this on her terms?
Think, I mean, I think that she should do what she feels like is best. You know, one thing that people don't really evaluate is the toll that all of this takes on not only you, but your family.
Right.
And I think, you know, there were those that never thought that Joe Biden could win, and the third time was the charm. I can't say what will happen. And honestly, I personally feel like the only reason we ended up with Barack Obama was because everything had fallen apart. And so depending on how desperate people are, I think that it may absolutely propel your not so likely candidate. I think that people potentially, even misogynists, would like hold their nose and be like, forget it, right? Like, I got to do this.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of those, you know, there were great stories about that, you know, you'd hear these stories about Barack Obama's 2008 campaign. They'd have canvassers in Western Pennsylvania, and they'd go to these doors that today are probably MAGA voters, but in 2008 they voted for Obama, and they referred to Obama as the African-American candidate, but they didn't use African-American or Black. And it gets to the point you just made, which is desperation sometimes gets, you know, this is what Trump and Obama have this in common.
Yes.
Right. There's a slice of voters who wanted massive change. Look, I go back. This is why I think ultimately Barack Obama made a mistake endorsing Hillary Clinton. No offense to Hillary Clinton. She certainly had earned a lot of things. And if this were at a job interview, she was the most qualified person for the job. But you and I both know it's not a job interview, right? It's a different type of deal. And I would argue that the Democratic Party picked Obama over Clinton because they didn't want the establishment in charge. And that when he went establishment, that may have been a fork in the road that if you now go back in time, that maybe he should have taken a different path.
Doug, you are making an argument for the situation that we find ourselves in right now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean,
no, which is why I definitely think new is going to be. I always say this, if you look at successful Democratic candidates for president, it's usually they're the new candidate. They're and they were not seen as the front runner at the start. Bill Clinton was that way. Jimmy Carter was that way. Barack Obama was that way. There is, new and electable, and it's subjective what electable is, but and the thing that I can't figure out is who's new, because every name we're going to mention is not new because we're mentioning their names, right? It is going to be, people will mention Mark Cuban. I bet you know Mark Cuban a little bit better than most people, given he's a Dallas guy.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's smart to go with sort of Trump light, but who knows?
I have no idea, but I do think that we won't truly have an idea of which way it's going to go until we really get closer to the election, because I do believe the desperation is going to set in. I mean, we will find out, there are those that are like, oh, we just got to take the House back. And you and I have already discussed how these lines are not set up for us. I mean, we are like an uphill climb in a lot of these races that we really should not be in. But even still, I think we are going to defy the odds. The question is, are we going to defy the odds and have, 3 seats? Are we going to defy the odds?
Can you have a working majority?
Right. Yeah, that we're going to have just a ton of people. And I think that will be our first. And then the Republicans will be given an opportunity to switch back and maybe slow down, right? Because they're like, whoa, this wrath is big, and it's going to continue on 2 years after that.